Om Namah Shivaya. Good morning. Welcome back to inthekhud. This is 15 September 2023, 10:34 a.m. and this is day 3. Technically, this is day 4 of environment render 3. But yesterday I ended up not documenting anything because A, there wasn't much to do to document, and B, I'm running very tight on timeline, so I can't afford to waste an entire hour of the day in. But today there is some significant progress that I've made that I want to document. Now, the last time that I was going through a checklist here for day 2, this is all that I covered. For day 3, these are the things that I wanted to do. Firstly, have a music storyboarding situation. Now you see what I mean by a music storyboarding is this. I take a track, this is from Motion Array, and then I put markers on it. Where the hook of the song is, let me make sure that it's visible. Where the hook of the song is, that's where I'm going to transition to the forum or your AI part. And so let me just go through these things once. The scene growth. Initially I was thinking that all of these trees and everything will come up, and I also made a driver system for it, but then in the end I decided not to go that route. So right now what happens is the seed fall starts from here. So these markers give me an idea. When you press Control and click on this, you go from seconds to frames. So this gives me an idea that this particular animation where the camera is going from left to right, that has to last for 66 frames. So then I come inside Blender and then I set up my timeline accordingly and the keyframes. From here to here the seed falls. You see that the seeds are falling here. I could make this particle the seeds a little more emissive, because it give a cartoony sort of thing. But anyway, seeds fall from here. This is one addition that I did at the very end, that when the seeds fall, there is grass which grows here, and then from underneath that the entire tree comes up. So if you see, the majority thing that I've done here is the fact that this tree which you see in the center, this is not from your sapling tree generator, and I've just instanced that is for all the trees behind. But this tree is a little different because I made it from scratch and I instanced points. Because the biggest thing that I was trying to figure yesterday or day before, I'm not sure, I think yesterday, is how can I have this revealing sort of effect where you just take a proximity thing like a null, remove it up, and then the contents which are underneath, they just get revealed. So that is something I was not able to figure, but I'll show how I did this tree coming up part. Okay, and then from here the deform part starts. I will also document that because overnight I left renders. That did not work. The second one I did today morning, that has worked more or less, but still I have to work on the last part where this becomes an apple tree. So the deform nonsense will continue till here, and then here the frame, we will go back to this scene here, the 3D scene, and instead of orange trees and everything, I'm going to make apple trees. One of the apple will fall in the box and the box will close, and then we'll have the brand insulate. So that's what the plan is for today. That was one thing. Driver for rotation and scale, seed 3D model, that is done. Patch of soil into which seed falls, that is done. Multiple days time lapse, I am not doing this. No time and no need. Growth of the center tree from seed, this is done. Render optimization, I'll show what I did for this, but it's not quite there yet. Final frame, this was done. Replacing orange, this is left. Creating node groups and creating asset library, these are things that I have to figure out today. So this I'm not doing. I'm going to remove the driver for rotation and scale. Let me show how that is actually working. So you see the amount of things that are happening here and the amount of keyframes in my timeline are on my dope sheet are relatively less. They are very, very less actually. So where do I start from? Let me start with the node tree itself. And the node tree is getting a little complicated, as in the noodles are going all over the place sort of. But yeah, the first thing, let me start with render optimization. So for render optimization on my node group itself, I made a thing where, let me stay in solid view, let me go to rendered view once in cycles. This is 12 samples, okay, and go back to my solid view. If I press F12 to render this frame, with everything on this particular frame, with the particle system seed and all these instances and all the main tree and everything, at 12 samples, this is taking, it should take around 20 seconds to render, which is what it was taking yesterday. 17 seconds. So once you start rendering the entire sequence out, it goes up to 20-21 seconds per frame. And so what I did is, I thought maybe because these environment things, they're not interacting with each other, they're just there behind, they're not even growing up or anything. And so if I could make separate passes of these, so what I mean by separate passes is if I could have, if you look at my viewport, if I could have the background trees just the background trees in one pass. Okay, so I would just render this out and that will lay at the bottom of my After Effects composite. Then I could have the foreground trees rendered in another pass. Then I could have the soil which is scattered here rendered in another pass. Usually the grass and soil would have to have like the same thing here. And then the main tree, which is the animation which is of the tree coming up here, the center tree here, that could be on another pass. And I tried doing that, but the thing is, even with all of these shut, like for example you saw 20 seconds right now, if I shut everything and just keep like background trees on and I hit render with this frame, you see the last frame took 17 or 18 seconds. And this frame is taking 11 seconds. This is actually very confusing, to be honest. I don't quite understand if this checkbox is actually helping render times, because yesterday I just put the background trees render, only that particular like pass for render, and it was taking 20 seconds per frame. That's why I thought it's just not worth it to do like separate passes, because it's just making my render like 4 times more expensive as far as time is concerned. So I want to really figure if this actually makes a difference. I'm going to show how this situation works. So basically what I've done is everywhere there is a collection that is being instanced, because this is all instances that are here. Like if you look at my spreadsheet, we have 31k instances. If I select this, 31,000 instances in this particular node group, and that's all there is. Like if I was to for some reason see the scene itself has 1,948,642 faces, and there are 54,000 objects. This is including the instances. So you see that out of them 31,000 are actually instances, and the others are proper geometry. So yeah, I think there is still scope for optimization. There's always scope for optimization. But how have I done that? So I've just added a simple switch node. Okay, and that switch itself I've added to the group input. So let's say for grass, and if this is true, I'm gonna get my grass base collection, which will get instanced here. If false, nothing. So if you put it at false and this is grass, so then grass will not be distributed. But I'm not exactly sure. See, the thing is, I'll tell you what, when I turn this on and off, like this methodology that I'm using, it does not change the instances here. That's at 31k. If I turn this on and off, it is actually not changing anything. If you look at my spreadsheet, if I was to shut everything off, even the main tree, you see the instances are still at 31k and the vertex edge face is still at the same number. So the conclusion that I'm drawing here is I have to probably do a delete geometry with this switch. If this switch is false, then you have to delete that geometry, and that will take a little more like logic building and algorithm, because I think only when the geometry is actually getting deleted, that is when the render time will actually be like how I want to. Because if I want to render only the background, it shouldn't be taking 20 seconds to render that frame. It should take like, I don't know, 4 seconds or 5 seconds. And if it's rendering that fast, only then it makes sense for me to. Now there is one obvious way that you could do is you could have all of these different things inside different collections here, which is like your normal way of working. And then you can just turn a collection off. Like for example, you just turn a collection off and then you render the collection that you really want to render. For example, here you see the Geonodes ground is this one collection, and the Geonodes tree is something in another collection. This again, how I made this, I'm going to quickly show you the node tree here. So I took the bark from the tree which I was getting from the sapling tree generator. Okay, and then on that bark I have done a grow bark. However, grown the bark, I have basically deleted geometry wherever the position is in z greater than some value here, grow bark. So this grow bark here, this value you see is going from 0 to 10 and it's running through a driver. Now for the driver, I'm going to open drivers editor. This is from Ucromedia's video on expressions in Blender. How do I find that? So grow bark edit driver. What's basically happening here is we take a common property here and we refer it. It's an empty called animation. Okay, and we put that path here. So inside property, inside an empty called animation, the path is main tree growth. Okay, so we've put that into a variable called tree anim. So when tree anim is going from 0 to 1. Okay, this is basically minimum value. So when it goes from 0 to 1, U should go from 10 to 0, and then this is the ending value. So the grow bark is going 10 to 0. Same thing here for grow leaves. If I edit driver, when that value is going from 1 to 2, you should go from 20 to 0. That's why you see first the bark grows up, then the leaves come up, and then if I look at this fruit part, I think that's the scale that is being driven here. So edit driver. When that value is going from 3 to 2, also 2 to 3, then you go from 10 to 0. So that is why just by playing with one value, going from 1 to 3, I'm first growing this, then I'm growing the leaves, and then the fruits are scaling up. This is the closest I could get to like replicating a tree growing sort of situation. There is definitely a better way to do it. I tried doing the geometry proximity thing, like this would come in here, and then when this is here, the scale would be big. The only problem that I was running into is if I take this here, right, this bottom part, wherever the position, so position of a null is basically where its origin point is, there the growth was happening. But the moment I take it up, this was becoming 0 again, because that's how the map range works with geometry proximity. Only where this is close, the scale will be big, otherwise it will be nothing. So by the time I come up here, I've gone through here, it's again become an empty bark. I was trying to think of maybe I can add here, I can maybe add a cube here, and then to that cube, I would just come in here, say set origin to 3D cursor, and I would take this up like this. And while this is happening, the faces, depending on the faces, I would have the proximity work, but that was not working. I tried doing that a lot. So again, the point that I was trying to talk about is render optimization. If you put it in collections separately like this, you could render it in the passes that I'm talking about. But that defies the purpose of the entire geometry node structure. When everything is inside one geometry node system like this, you can have each element, like your foreground trees and your background trees, communicate with each other, and based on that, then you scatter soil based on the proximity of the trees, and then you scatter grass based on the proximity of the soil. And then you do raycast, as in this is the plane, you can only stay above the ground. All these things are something that you miss out on if you make different collections. So yeah, I definitely noticed that the instances and the geometry is not being affected by this switch. So this switch is definitely not the way to work. I have to figure like how to actually delete geometry when I hit that switch button. So that stays to be done for render optimization. Yeah, I don't think there's anything else. Driver, I told you how I made the driver. That's for the entirety of the video. Like at every different point, the driver situation is working that way. Now for the deform renders that I've made, which will come in between, I'll just quickly document those. So my deform renders, if I come to my deform folder, let's try one, and the try one goes something like this. Let me make this visible on my screen. Man, I love this feature of auto hotkey. No more manual adjusting. Stay in G2. So the first one is like this was the end frame, the frame that I gave as init. If I go to my After Effects, it is this frame here. This goes into, oh, by the way, I forgot to mention that I rendered all of these out in like a transparent background, and then I've added a sky video behind, just like an alpha sky video. Yeah. So then you get clouds and everything naturally. Okay, so that's your init frame, and from here the prompts I've given is Indian plants which are with fruits that are ready to be harvested. I think this was try 1, and this was good enough, but towards the end, right, this is something I'm still not figured yet, is that why towards the end it starts to lose. It's almost like a printer which towards the end goes out of ink, so things start to look very wacky. In the beginning it's like full of ink and contrast, but by the time you come to the end, I don't know what's going on here, because the ending frame is important, because from that frame I have to transition back to my 3D scene again. So this was try 1, which I did overnight. This was try 2. I think, what did I change in try 2? Where is VLC? What was it that I changed in try 2? I changed the prompts a little, and I changed the speed because I wanted to like go a little faster. And I think I changed the prompt to wide shot of fruits or plants ready to be harvested, something like that. So I changed the prompt a little bit. But even with this render, I wasn't happy with the way it was ending. Like again, the same problem of ink running out with the apple tree situation was a problem. So I definitely need to fix that apple tree part. So for that, I've been working on a few fillers here. So this is the first filler where again the ink is already run out. I don't know how that's supposed to work. Filler 2, I think I changed a little bit of prompt, like I added a realistic renders and everything. But here again, I'm not very happy with the color. Like why is it getting all green and not red, even though my prompt clearly says, if you look at my prompt, it clearly says apple tree with bright red apples, ultra realistic, hyper detailed realistic environment. I don't want this green apples here. And the filler 3, the one that I last worked on, is not here. There's something here. So yeah, this is something I have to still put to render and figure out how that will work. And if I quickly check whatever I have to do today now, firstly, again, render optimization is something that I will work on because that's extremely important, but that's not absolutely needed at the moment. What I need to do is make the box first for the brand and then add that branding stuff to it, which is going to be very simple, very easy. Replacing orange trees with apple trees. So I'm going to make a duplicate of the entire scene and everything there where there are like orange trees and like oranges distributed. I have to replace this with apple. Again, it's going to be a Sketchfab model that I take. It's going to be simple. Now I have to create node groups because you see the way the node tree is looking, it's extremely hard to read. Even though there are frames and all the frames are labeled, the situation is getting a little difficult to like maneuver. And yeah, I'm really glad, like in this particular project, one thing is the fact that I made it from scratch, everything. Unlike the last project where I took the entire coconut scene, which was like the biggest mistake starting off. You should not take an entire scene because that scene had like actual geometry in it, and these are all like instances, even though they're not 100% optimized, but this is much more optimized than the previous scene that I made. And I have used in geometry nodes itself, I've used geometry proximity a lot, which I was always scared of using. I used raycast a lot, which I was afraid of using. And yeah, I'm just learning and I'm just growing, and this is the only thing that I could not figure out is why this doesn't work with Eevee. Like geometry node structures by themselves don't seem to work well with Eevee. Like if this frame is taking 20 seconds to render in cycles, it'll take like 30 seconds to render in Eevee, and it will look completely garbage in Eevee. Like even I thought of adding irradiance volume and like baking the indirect lighting, but I know as a matter of fact, like if I go to my material preview here, material preview is basically what your Eevee render will be, because that's what Eevee is, like real-time preview. You look at how, even though it's just not looking right, like the light is completely off, and yeah, it's just meh, completely meh. And even it being meh, if it was like a real-time render, I would still consider doing something with baking indirect lighting. But I think it's because of geometry nodes and the way geometry nodes works. If I go to Eevee and I hit render, you see my last frame took firstly you don't see progress also with the Eevee render happening, so it takes a long time to render. We've again hit that problem of lag when I'm there's something that happens every now and then. There's a lag with Eevee Cam. I don't quite know what it is. I brought this up and things started to go. So Blender is not responding at the moment because I hit Eevee for a render, and this is at 64 samples. Maybe if I could take the sample down to 12. So you see this particular frame in Eevee by default, at looking at how garbage it is, like it just completely looks trash. This is taking 43 seconds to render, 100% not usable. So I'm going to go to slot 2, take this down to 12 samples in render and hit render again. So we're just rendering 12 samples instead of 64 samples now. And that was how much? 43 seconds. So one thing I've noticed is when it comes to samples, the way something looks is not at all a problem. Like it looks more or less the same. Yeah, we've come down to 10 seconds. So yeah, maybe we can experiment with using an Eevee render for everything. It's just that leaves and everything, they don't look very natural. Let me try adding an irradiance volume to the scene. And even navigating with Eevee is very difficult. Like if I was to even stay in the rendered view, with cycles, it's a lot easier to navigate. You see how laggy this is? I basically cannot navigate. In solid you can still probably navigate. Anyway, I'm gonna add an irradiance volume here. Shift A, light probe, irradiance volume. I'm gonna scale this in the Z, scale this in the Y, scale this in the X. You just want to make sure that your entire scene is inside the bottom or the inner circle. Okay, and I think we could add a little more in your world properties. Is it in your world properties or where? Irradiance. Yeah, irradiance volume. I could add a little more resolution, so like go for 8. And then you come into world settings and or your render settings and bake indirect lighting. So let me go into another slot at the moment. Right now we're at 12 samples and it's taking 10 seconds to render an Eevee with no indirect lighting. 10 seconds. I'm going to go to slot 3. In my render properties, if I can only find it at the right time. Indirect lighting, bake indirect lighting. Where is the progress? Oh my god. And this is taking a very, very long time. So I'm gonna stop this episode right here, like a cliffhanger sort of situation, and we'll document how the entire render went, like the entire export, tomorrow. So thanks so much for being in the code. I will catch you. There's a lag. I'll catch you tomorrow. Peace.